This morning we're gonna talk about incest. I made a few notes and I truly hope that we will first have to say that I don't like this lesson. It's hard for me to teach this. When I prepared myself yesterday, I was very tired just because to think through the problems involved with incest, and I don't like that so much. And it's also not easy for you to listen to this topic, but I think, and I truly say this with compassion in my heart, that we have an obligation towards the victims and the perpetrators because they have suffered so much because of the problem of incest. And therefore, they went through so much tears and problems, and we need to give our attention because of the victims and the perpetrators. First, I would like to read a little part from the Bible. It really touched my heart because of this lesson, and you can find this in Matthew 18, verse 1 to 11. Matthew 18. On one hand, we see the compassion of the Lord Jesus Christ when it's all about the child. But in the second part, we find a very serious warning that the Lord Jesus is expressing about those who seduce children. And Matthew 18 says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He called a little child and had him stand among them, and he had said, 'I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like the little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.'" A child he placed within the group of people, the men, the adults, and in another place in the Bible, those adults, those disciples, kept the children away from Jesus. And the Lord Jesus says that they have to move out of the way so that the children can come to him. And when the children are standing around him, he puts his arm around them and he's blessing them. Children have a big place in the Lord Jesus Christ, in his heart. And it's so important to have a heart that cares for people, cares especially for children who are so vulnerable, children that cannot protect himself and depend so much on the adults. And in the midst of all those adults, he puts a little child in the middle, and he says, we have to become like a little child. And then we have that serious warning, "And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and be thrown and drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. Such things must come, but woe to the man through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. See that you do not look down on one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. And because the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost. He's placed the child and the problems concerning a child central in one passage of the Bible. Children that are deformed and mutilated through perpetrators who abuse them sexually. I think, and I rather say this at the beginning, that it's a big problem for those among us who have been have to deal with incest in their lives, maybe as a victim, or on the other hand as a perpetrator, because we all know that it goes in the life of a human being who's living without the will of God. That person is able to do all kind of terrible sins. And maybe some people sitting here say, I have faced this problem of incest so nearby in my own body, in my own life. Then it's a little bit double when you are listening here, because this is a training for counselors to help other people. That is why we are trained for. That's why we are here together for 2 years. But this morning maybe you are sitting here not only as a counselor, but also that you are a victim of incest. And it means that because of this lesson, many memories and pain can come back to your mind, because all that went and happened in your life, all kind of emotions of bitterness, of struggle, maybe of hatred and resentment. And that's all possible because you've been damaged so much when you were a young child, that when you are faced again with this problem of incest, that it's hard to deal with. Of course, in many more lessons we run into this than only the lesson of incest, because after some lessons in the break, people have been touched so much through the lesson that was passed on that it really went through their own life. And then they have all kind of questions during the break. When I think about questions of people who have been involved in occultism, and when you start to talk about it, it even seems like you experience that force of that occultism, and that you would rather not speak about that problem. But people have been involved in it. The same with people that have went through a divorce and who face still so much pain when the people left you alone. And you have been wounded so much, and when you need to listen to a lesson about divorce, it could be that you feel the pain again and all the memories. And that's the same with the lesson about homosexuality. Something that comes so close in the family where things have taken place like that. And then it's difficult to listen to a lesson like this, because you have been confronted with the problems yourself in your own personal life. And therefore it's not easy to listen to a lesson like this morning about incest. And I say it very carefully, but try to listen to this lesson to become a good counselor yourself, to understand a little bit more. And maybe you know it from your own life, but if you know other things to tell us about the whole problem, share it with us so that we can learn and add things to the lesson, so that we can be a good help for those people who have been damaged and hurt so much because of incest. Why I started with Matthew 18 is to point out that it's so important to teach your children or grandchildren and protect them, and to show them and raise them up in love, especially also when with all the things that has to deal with the sexuality and the development in the lives of children and young people. A lot of times young people hear about sexuality, but many times it's all about what they have to watch and what is wrong. And of course, practical things will be mentioned, but most of the time with the to warn them, but not so much to showing them really the love that needs to be involved with the sexuality, and that should be the motivation of sexuality, love, learning how to love. And children needs to be raised up in this, so that they can apply it in their own lives and make right decisions. Because the children have so many wrong thoughts about sexuality, and that has a big influence in their life, because they had the wrong information about sexuality, because they need to hear about the pure love that the Lord God has intended it to be. And it's very important to tell them. It's very sad, and it's hard even to mention that incest occurs not only just with children, but also that it happens many times with babies. And personally, I find it disgusting even to speak about it, and that it's hard to imagine anything about that it really gives resentment in your heart when you think about the things that happen with babies, with very little children, how they are already abused sexually. The biggest group of incest are girls, but more and more where young boys are abused in this area of sexuality. And sometimes it needs a little other form of counseling. When we look at point 3, it says something about statistics of a few years ago, and you have to read that for yourself. Some points have percentages. When you look at 75% suffer of incest by parents and caregivers, and then you wonder what is happening today very nearby in houses, most of the time in secret. Victims most of the time are girls between 8 and 14 years old. 1 out of every 8 girls is abused, and that the period for 4 to 7 years that they have been abused, and even there are exceptions where it's even more and longer, then it's very terrible what all is happening in the houses of people. And I also wrote down, and makes it a little bit more difficult, that we have just as much situations of incest in Christian and in non-Christian families. A friend of mine, he is social worker in some area of Holland with a very much church background, and he said that he had faced every day of incest problems in all kind of Christian families. And the sad thing is that there is even incest based upon the Bible in such a way that children in this situation, their fathers need to obey. It's a biblical thought, but from a wrong perspective, wrong motivated, to obey your parents in such a way that children can be abused, and then they also need to honor their parents. When you hear things like that, then you truly wonder, what are people doing towards their children, even in Christian families, when it's all about this terrible topic, incest. At home, a book I have about incest, especially this book, because it's written through women who have been victimized themselves by incest, being sexually abused in their own family. And these women know exactly what they are talking about. They do their own story about their lives, and in the same time the book is written. I never would like to borrow someone this book, because it's too gross sometimes to read what they all describe that happened with them, and you wrestle through the pages, but you do a counseling work and you need to know some things to help other people, but that also write about the professional counseling that is so superficial when it's all about help with incest victims. And these women wrote this book and made a summary about sexually abused children within the family. And they described it very carefully, but I'm very thankful that they didn't only read about the things that happened with the body, but also what happened in the psyche, who are much bigger. The damage is done in the lives of children cause a traumatic experience that lasts lifelong. When you think about this, it's hardly to imagine. Maybe you have a trauma in some kind of situation in your life, and then you know that it's really with you in your life. It seems like it takes you captive, even keeps you busy day and night. Every time again it comes back to you. It seems like you can not get rid of that trauma anymore, and sometimes it seems to increase, but when it has to deal with sexual abuse, it's a trauma that they write about. It's lifelong. And then it says, it seems like it never comes an end to the pain, to the memory, the fear, and the despair. Pain. An unbearable pain caused through the abuse of a perpetrator, not only in the body, but also in the psyche of a human being. It seems like there is no end to the memory. Pictures that are so stuck in your mind that it's very hard to get rid of them. One person wrote in this book, sometimes I feel like I'm going through it. It's getting better, but suddenly you are again in the middle of it. Suddenly you think back again of what happened, and it seems that there is no end to it. You know, that's also the reason why I find it so difficult to pass on this lesson. A few times I passed on this lesson, but it's terrible. I don't like it, because you need to talk about things that will bring up memories in the lives of people, and that is what you don't want to happen. You don't know what starts to heal, that it's torn open, but we have to discuss it, because it's a counseling course to help other people. But that memory is a terrible thing. It's like a nightmare. The fear that never seems to end. I will talk about it a little bit later. But and the despair that it influences you so badly that you don't know where to go. When a perpetrator is given in to the police, most likely he will be punished. But a lot of times the punishment is not longer than 2 years. But those counselors do not understand enough that our punishment is lifelong. Lydia and I, the last few weeks, about 6 people who have been victim of incest, we met them. And one woman, for 55 years ago, it happened to her. And she had been living through those 55 years, and every time she tried to push it away. In all those years, she never talked about it with someone. And finally, during the Bible study, her heart was touched, and then afterwards she talked about it. Finally, 55 years, it was a big burden in her life. You notice that people have a lifelong. Well, for the perpetrators, there is only a short time of prison and punishment. Someone said, and that touched my heart, I experience incest in my life as an ever ongoing echo in my... It's echoing in my life. As a child, there would be a well, and you would shout in the well, and then it would resound along the wall, and for 4 or 5 times you would hear the thing you screamed into the well. But what happened to you, and it's echoing through your life, the incest, then you suffer a lot. Then we have a description. If it's nice to listen or not, just write it down, because you need those things to pick up the signals. What happens with a girl that is abused sexually at their own home in the first place? Of course, there are physical consequences. A child can have ruptures, fractures, infections, sexual diseases. It means that the body is being maimed of a child, a girl, so young. I don't want to talk about all the details what I mentioned, because the words alone are strong enough. Only when people start to explain what it really includes, it really makes you kind of sick in your stomach. All that happened with those little children. And then as a pastoral counselor, you need to try to stay objective towards also the perpetrator. But it's easy to become subjective. Objectivity seems to be so hard. You have to, therefore, you need to listen and listen. What we notice is that in all kinds of situations with children that didn't go anything wrong, children are very vulnerable, and that a child, as being a child, cannot defend itself. Especially not when it's about an older person who has a much stronger will. And there something else is important too. It's so sad when it happens with little children. Little children have no idea about their own will. it's not developed yet. That really knowing who I am, that occurs later on in their childhood. When a child is sexually abused, then it's all about the other person. The other person ruling over your will. The other person is just doing what he or she wants to do. When the child is a little older and starts to find out, I have also an own will, then sadly enough, it's not yet strong enough to protect and resist. But in the whole process, that they are aware, I have also an own will, but what the other wants is opposite of what I desire as a child. But what can I do as a child? It really misforms a child in the development of their own will and who they are as a little person. The little child cannot understand all of this and of the things the perpetrator wants to have, because it's opposite of what the child needs and desires to have. It's very sad, and remember this very well, that incest is a process that starts very gradually. A process that starts very subtle and gradually. It develops itself so slowly and in a very subtle way. Many times it's going hand in hand with giving extra attention. Giving extra attention to the child, to be a little more friendly, to give all kind of little presents, and to be very nice. And if you want to win a child for you, those are the 4 ingredients, and you can win a child for yourself, because a child desires to be liked, to be loved. A child wants to be loved. A child would like to have some extra attention. And of course, every child really likes it to have and get a little present. And that's the danger of that it happens so gradually and that it moves into something that is not good anymore. Therefore, sexual abuse in a family is a very long process, and the perpetrator moves a little further every time, and then he wants to get things back because of what he is given. And the problem is that the child cannot go anywhere. It's stuck. It's looking for comfort. It seeks for security and love, while the house they are still living becomes more and more unsafe place. And there is no protection in the house where she's living, where she needs to receive comfort and security. It becomes very unsafe in her house. But where is a child able to go to? She is stuck. She cannot go anywhere. And what happens? And this is what those adult women write who have been sexually abused themselves. Then something happens like hate and loyalty. 2 things that finally don't fit together, but it happens in your inner life. Why? Because you depend on the other person. You have no other choice, but you don't want it. You have to be loyal, because otherwise something worse can happen. But the hate towards that person is growing and growing. One person wrote in a story, sometimes my body responded to the touches when I was sexually abused as something I started to enjoy. Some touches I started to enjoy. My body started to respond to it. But the result of this were very terrible, because when I started to enjoy some of the touches, then afterwards I felt so very guilty, and I felt so much shame that something in my body, something happened that I would enjoy it for the moment. But the result in her life, what is confirmed in the lives of many other women, that especially in that period of time, she started to separate her mind from her feelings. That happens also in the lives of prostitutes. A prostitute would not be able to handle her feelings after having one man after another. You need to separate your feelings from your mind, otherwise you cannot do the work of a prostitute, as they say themselves. And that is also a lot of time the case, and that's very important to know, being able to help someone, that someone separated his feelings from her mind, just being able to survive. Otherwise, surviving would not have been possible. I will talk about this a little bit later. Another point is fear. And this is also a little difficult to explain, because there is not only one kind of fear, but there are many different kinds of fear that, especially in the life of an abused child, have developed. One person told us in one of the counseling sessions that she was sexually abused as a child through her father, and her father was a minister. And a certain day she was so afraid when her father took her into the backyard and showed her a big ditch was digged in the garden, and he warned her, when you're gonna talk with your mother about the abuse, about the sexual things, I'm gonna bury you here alive. It means that the child was not only physically abused, but also her inner person has been abused through this threatening of her father. And until this day, she's still not recovered of this fear. Fear because of the consequences if she would talk about the things her father did to her. Fear because you cannot escape, because of that is kind of hanging above your head. You cannot go nowhere. Fear for violence. Please remember this or write it down, because otherwise, in the last part of the lesson, you will not be able to pick up the signals those victims send out. You need to know the signals, otherwise we pass by those signals, and we cannot help the people. For years I didn't pick up any signals concerning incest, because I didn't know the signals. I didn't know the problems all around sexual abuse. But now you recognize more and more that people send out signals, but who is receiving them and knowing what to do? Fear for death, with which the other person is threatening you. Fear that others notice something about you. Always that you need to hide the secret thing that is disformed in your body. Fear that it becomes known, although you would like that to happen. and look forward that others would find out about it. One woman told me this story. 4 years ago, regularly, she has been abused through her boss. She was working as in the housekeeping in a family, and very consciously, I don't know where I found the courage, but very consciously, I took off my bracelet when I was laying in bed with this man, and I hoped that his wife would find it. I was terrified, and I desired that it would become known. And the woman found it, and it was strange, and she asked a question about it, and he had some kind of explanation. Fear of that was that what would happen, but you desire that other people would find out. There is fear with girls who are menstruating because they are afraid that they become pregnant and that they need an abortion or are forced in it. There is so much fear. But there is more. Because of this, and that's the next signal, there is a very severe loneliness. Loneliness in a total isolation. Out of the thought, it happens to them alone. I can't get out of this. This isolation is increased in the families, in those families where they do not speak about sexuality. And in earlier days, it was more and more common not to talk about sexuality in the families. It was a kind of a hidden thing, and especially in those families where the sexuality was not being able to talk about. There, a child that is abused will be in a more big isolation. It's good to talk with your children. Start young to tell a little bit simple things about sexuality so they learn and grow. I don't forget that in the church where I was a minister, that the young people asked me to talk about sexuality. When I said, of course I would like to do that, and they were a little bit surprised, as long as I can talk about sexuality in the Bible. And it was pretty busy that night. About 90 people, young people came, and we talked about it for 1.5 hours. And they didn't realize and know that the Bible mentions so much about sexuality. And one of the elders came to me, where did you find the courage to talk about this? And I tell them, do they only have to hear about sexuality by the television and hear the wrong and see the wrong things? While sexuality is so good, given by God, holy, why should we not talk about it open in a normal way? It's good to do that and speak about it to prevent that children will not become isolated and that they don't find answers for their own problems. There are many other signals, but be very careful that when you mention those signals in the lives of children, that you not make the conclusion right away that the child will be abused sexually, but the signals are there and we need to know them. A lot of times they suffer from sleeplessness when they have been abused. Sleeplessness because of fear. They are afraid to sleep. There are learning disabilities at the schools. It's difficult, hard for them to pick it up at school. They have a problem with concentrating themselves on what they need to learn. They are very unstable. They are very tough. And with all those signals, the outside world responds in a negative way. And they are corrected, sometimes even beaten, because of how they behaved. And the loneliness will increase because of this. And children are put to the side because they cannot get along with the other children at school. They can't keep up with the lessons because they have a hard time to concentrate because they don't sleep enough. That loneliness is only increasing because within the families, children a lot of times are isolated by the perpetrators. There are social restrictions. No friends are allowed to come and play there because maybe they would find out. And those social contacts are taken away from the children, and they become lonely and more lonely. And when it happens that the perpetrator has to go to prison, and there are many fathers and brothers who finally end up in the prison because it came out into the open what happened, that is a lot of times it. He is in prison, so problem solved. Many women, they complain about it, that they never found any help after that problem, and say, okay, now he's out of the door, he's in prison, problem is solved, and the professional counselors hardly have no understanding that the child on this moment feels responsible for the fact that father or brother is in prison. And as a child, they made it known. And the children become feeling very guilty. And it makes it more heavy. Women write in this book, and we know this from conversations, that father comes back into the family and that the child needs to go out of the home, into a foster parent home, because the child needed to have some protection, so had to go to a foster home. But the child wasn't guilty. But the child had to leave the house. Of course, it needs to be protected. But we need to learn to think through what is going on in the lives of this child. Also when they have to go out of the home while they are the victim. Point 5 in the lesson. It says about signals. And there it says, as a rule, these are the consequences of sexual abuse, but we must learn to know them in order to recognize them. Signals are being sent out, but who catches on to them? So many times the life is so abused and no one picked up the signals. You need to recognize the signals. You need to get to know the situation. That's why we teach this lesson. And knowing about the situation and the signals that are there are always from the results. Results are signals. In some way you're always too late, but at least what you're able to do is good for the child. The results are they have to do with fear, loneliness, being behind, living isolated from others. Those are signals that children show in their behavior. But you need to be able to pick them up. Families where no one is welcome, everyone is staying outside, where children don't like adults, where children want to stay away from the one who is stronger than him or her. I will mention another signals, but now from adults in their adult life who dealt with incest in their lives when they have been abused in their own family. The process is lifelong, as I've mentioned before. It means that there are some characteristics that move on with you through life that you need to deal with. Therefore, that we speak about the consequences in their adult life. Women who have been abused as children have so many problems when they are married. It's hardly, almost very difficult to give them sexually to their partner. Lydia and I, we counseled a woman a few times that said, when I have sexual intercourse with my husband, then I just let him do his own thing. And I just switch off my feelings and emotions. Maybe you can judge this attitude, that's not good when you're married, but she wasn't able to do it in a different way. I don't want to think about it, about the sexuality, that I can give myself and that I would be able to enjoy it. I cannot think and understand this. Are you not able and allowed to enjoy it? And she says, no. I never have been able to enjoy it, as long as the perpetrator was able to enjoy it. And I even had to cut off, to separate my feelings from my mind, even as a child. And that is not recovered when you become an adult, unless you receive a partner that is very sensitive and wise and loving, and that is very difficult. I know some couples who told me about this confidently, and one person said, yes, I'm healing because of the fact that because of my partner who is so patient with me. And the sexuality, I don't need to do that if I cannot handle it on the moment. And my husband will not force me. And he helps me so much that I have the impression that something starts to heal within myself. And it's not strange when you have to deal with sexuality and you cannot give yourself, because it's the result of the fact that you've been abused sexually when you were a child. And you take that with you when you grow up and married. Some women even are disgusted of the body of a man. And that will also be again there when you are married, of course. And then big problems arise. A lot of girls are not able to have children anymore, and then they don't have any interest anymore to have sexual intercourse. Not only having sexual intercourse, but in all the physical approach of a man to a woman. They don't have any interest in that anymore. One woman said, "I never been able to give my husband a tender kiss. He can kiss my cheek, but never my lips, because I think it's disgusting." Have they not been happy? Yeah? But what has been damaged in her life, she's carrying with her her life long. Enjoying is something that it's hard for her to allow herself. You don't allow that to yourself anymore, to enjoy. People that build such a thick walls around their lives, their heart, that they have a hard time to allow someone to come into their lives. I've noticed that as a pastoral counselor, and I'm happy that I never counseled an incest victim alone by myself, because as a man, that's not a good thing to do, to counsel them by yourself, because there is such a big wall around that life of that woman, and there is no confidence just because the fact you are a man. And it's hard to really move on in the counseling because there is a wall, and it's not wise to do so. There is no confidence. Another thing that is mentioned, what I have to deal with as an adult, I, who has been abused as a child, I discovered that my will never really developed in a healthy way. My will is not developed because my will was not important enough, because it always had to do about the will of the perpetrator, of the other person. And what happens when you grow up and your will has not developed yet? The result is that you are always living in a very big insecurity. You don't know what you want, and you don't know what to will anymore. All the time you need confirmation of another person who has to say for 10 times, yeah, just go ahead, make a decision, it's good what you think, and then you have to say that again and again because they are so uncertain. Maybe you never thought about it yourself, that those things are cutting into the lives of a person who has been sexually abused so deeply. The result is, when children who have been abused as a child, when they grow up and become an adult, that a lot of women hate themselves. They punish themselves. That they humiliate themselves. As a result of what happened to them, they take bad care of themselves. They don't take care of themselves well. And when something goes wrong in the family, in their marriage, then they feel responsible and make themselves guilty about what went wrong, because they have been blamed about anything, anyway, anyhow. And then they have the attitude of, I take the guilt upon myself, I'm responsible about what went wrong, it's always my fault. Also, adults describe their fear when they have been grown up. Always fear to be stalked, that somebody would follow them. Another person who had been stronger followed you and took things from you. Your fear to be stalked. It's a signal that people show. Don't think too easily that you have to deal with a person who involved with incest, because other people can have this too. Fear to be alone, because you don't know if something is gonna happen. Fear to be in an enclosed area, because always the door has been locked when he came in again. Always to be in a room where I couldn't go anywhere while I wanted to flee. Fear to be touched. One person wrote down that with an investigation they found out that adult women who have been abused, that most of the time are sleeping, laying on their belly and putting their hands upon their belly, and sometimes they cannot sleep in any other way. They cannot sleep with a pyjama because it's putting in their neck too much. Fear in all kind of situations. When I read one of those stories, the person wrote down a little poem. And we have the habit a little bit, when we have some subjects, to have a little poem that fits to the subject. So I wrote down this: as child abused, humiliated, downtrodden, raped and put in the cold. I am that child and ask for love and protection. I ask for warmth, for care and understanding, because I'm sick of the past. When you read this little poem, oh God, this is what needs to be in the center of the counseling. The warmth, the care, that understanding. Because it's all about someone who is sick of the past. And that past is speaking very clearly. In the lesson also something is said about different kind of wrong stories, myths. It is mentioned in lesson 34, Incest, point 8. In the first place, the understanding of incest. Some women who brought about an organization about incest, they wrote down in a little leaflet that they have problems with the word incest because it's not really saying all that it is all about. Incest is not only just sexual intercourse, but incest moves on much further. For instance, with all sorts of sexual acts, with touches, with rape. It has to do with that I am threatened in my sexual life, even without that anything happened yet, but only the way I've been threatened. And then they write, and professional counselings are not understanding this well enough, and they only think it has to do with the sexual intercourse. Then there are all kind of explanations about incest, and especially when brothers who committed incest with brothers or sisters, and then they say like, oh, was it not just like playing the doctor and like physical investigation? No? That was not just playing doctor. That's a myth. It moved on much further, and it was much more serious. Do you understand, with all the pain that what happens when people that have been through it, and then they hear those myths and they need to accept it somehow because it's not, that's the way people think about it, but it's wrong, the myth. of provocation. A mother, 35 years of her life, she lived in the captivity of being sexually abused and all the problems involved, but she went through it and was helped. But in one of the first sessions we had, one point she brought out, I am the guilty one because I seduced this man to do what he did, sexual abusing me. I'm guilty. When I asked her, how old have you been when it happened? And she said, I was 6 years of age. And God brought something in my heart to ask her, tell me, how old is your youngest daughter? And I didn't know. And it really shocked her. And she said, 6 years. And what I never did, but then I think that God used it. Then I used this situation. I tried to help her, just to ridicule her a little bit in the way, like, do you really think that your daughter of 6 years have been able to seduce an adult man in his sexuality, that she was being able to bring an adult to doing something, abusing sexually the girl? No. When she thought about it, my daughter of 6 years old would not have been able to seduce an adult and make him do such a terrible thing. No. She was not able to. And then I said, and would you have been able to do that to an adult when you were 6? And then she said, no. When you put it in this way, I think I was not able to do that. And then she was set free through the grace of God from this thought pattern that she was not the guilty one. And of course, for years and years, she was talked into, like, you were the one who seduced me and you are the guilty one, what the perpetrator told her. But then for 35 years you are captivated in this pattern of thinking, I'm the guilty one, that I brought this man so far to do this terrible thing to me. What a life. But God set her free from this captivity and wrong thoughts. It's a myth of provocation of a child to an adult person. It's also a myth when people sexually abuse children, that those people are a psychopath. Of course, there are several of them that do really crazy things, but don't think that every person who is abusing a child sexually, that he is a psychopath. They discovered that it's not the case, that most of the people who are perpetrators are just normal people, but normal between question marks, because they do something wrong. Sometimes they explain them as people who are just poor people, just said that they are like this, and they protect the perpetrators. Sometimes there is a myth of the family they've been grown up in has been a sick family. Sometimes they call it an anti-social family environment, and that's the place where things like this happened. Sadly so, because it's not the truth. It does not only happen in sick families or only in anti-social families and environment, but it happens in all layers of society until the highest top. A young woman of 20 years of age responded to a broadcasting on the radio where we mentioned some things about this, and she called and said I have such a need. For 20 years, her father abused her sexually. And she said, finally I'm so far to talk about it. And now I called to a psychologist, and she made this phone call in January. And he says, I have some time for you, 10th of November, for about 20 minutes. And she said, I don't know what to do. I want to talk after 20 years. And I told this woman, come tomorrow. If I have to cancel all my appointments, I cannot let this go. I also didn't know what to do and what I would run into. Just come and talk. And I will listen. It shocked me that she told me that she was daughter of one of the most famous ministers in Holland, still preaching the word of God. And we talked with her, and I advised her to write down all that happened to her on paper, and it wouldn't mind what kind of words she would use, but as long as she would express what happened and her feelings would come out, and that she first would send that letter to me so that we could study it before we would send it to her father. And she wrote down 32 pages. And I never read something like this before. It really touched my heart. For hours I've been reading and wrestling through the pages, and we started to talk about it point by point, and we changed some words, not what was said, but to put it in a little different frame. And we said, okay, we start to pray before we will send this letter, but first I would like you to come to me before we will send this letter. And then I prepared her when she would send this letter and her father would deny it, what it would mean for her. When I told this to her, when we sent the letter and your father will deny it, what do you think about this? She almost started to panic and she almost become hysteric. And if he will deny it, then, and I will not repeat the words she mentioned, but then when she calmed down, we prayed, and then I said, okay, but you have to keep it in account that he can deny it. 2 weeks later on, her father responded, and in that letter, he denied everything she mentioned, and it was only fantasy of her. After 20 years of being sexually abused by a father. Thank you, Art, that you prepared me on this response of my father. That has been a blessing to me. I don't know what I would have done if I would not have been aware of the fact that he would deny everything. Such a terrible things happen in this area that we need to be so sensitive to help people and to help them how to deal with all the things. It's not a reality. This happens only in antisocial families or sick families. It happens in the most high social environment. And therefore it's good that we get rid of those myths. And how hard and painful this lesson could be, that we allow us to be confronted with reality of the situations where thousands of people live in day by day. Just please forgive me that I say it like this, because it's not normal that Lydia and I, the last 14 days, 6 people we run into have been involved with incest. And some of them we never expected it, that they have been involved with sexual abuse as victims of incest. No, just through the Word of God, to the Holy Spirit, that finally those people started to talk about it. And then you notice that all that you do and learn about this is confirmed by those women. Therefore, it's so important that we teach this lesson about incest before we move on about how to counsel the people and answer a few questions. We will have a break of about half an hour. If you have some other questions, please tell us.